talk about The Other Wind, the last of the Earthsea novels by Ursula K. Le Guin. I really love this book. I love it as a development and a sort of rounding out of all the Earthsea stories. I love the coda it sort of gives to the main characters, and I love the general dreamy optimism of the whole book. It's just great. It was a really unexpected pleasure when it came along. This book comes many years after Tehanu, which was the fourth novel. In between, there were some novellas that fleshed out the world that took place at different points in Earthsea's history, which are very good. I believe they were collected in a collection called Tales from Earthsea, and they sort of hint at the deeper developments to the world that Tehanu did. In Earthsea, the first trilogy shares a fairly unifying vision of sort of the rules of this fantasy world, where there is magic, but it is based on rules about knowing sort of the true speech, where certain things are allowed and certain aren't. There are dragons, and there are the old powers of the earth, both of which are kind of seen as alien and threatening, potentially, although a few people can perhaps commune with them. And there's a land of the dead, which wizards can travel to, although never without risk. So the world has it has rules within which the story takes place. It doesn't just sort of like staple on new pieces of its universe as it becomes handy for the story to have, as in, say, some fantasy universes. I won't name them because it seems a little griping, but if they find it to be inconvenient for characters to be separated, they will find a sort of magical, quick travel alternative that was not previously hinted at in the story. If they're competent, of course, they'll layer in at least some reference to it, but it generally still feels, and this is common to all sorts of genres, it's not just fantasy, and science fiction. It's like, oh, there's a wormhole over by Sector 18. But you can feel the story twisting the universe rather than taking place within the universe. In Earthsea, you always felt the stories were taking place within a universe with real obstacles and limits. And they were, heart-wrenching at times. They were sad. They were melancholic, especially the limits in terms of the humanity's fate, like the land of the dead. It's a dry, sad place. It's something like the land of the dead as envisioned in sort of Homer or ancient Greek, where there's no sense of ancient Greek dramas and such, where there's no sense of, there is neither rest nor peace nor joy. It's simply a dry, barren wasteland to which people can occasionally come to ask Tiresias a question or something. So in the next two books, the novel Tehanu and the collections Tales from Earthsea, there are these unexplained tugs at the rules of the Earthsea universe, in which parts of the earlier universe that were sort of thought to be kind of fixed, sort of like how it is here, are shown to perhaps not be, to be the consequence of choices made in the world of Earthsea by particular people. Particular things could be different there. there is a there's a history to how these worlds work. Tehana, for example, hints at a deeper connection between humanity and the dragons, as well as the natural world, as well as does one of the novellas in Tales from Earthsea. In one of the novellas in Tales from Earthsea, it's also shown that the decision that women don't become wizards is not because they can't. It was a decision early by the people who set up the School of Wizardry on Rogue, to sort of embrace this kind of monastic existence, and it didn't come. It's not a fixed feature of the universe. There's no reason that women can't learn magic except that no one will teach them magic. There's a very fine story where we learn about a major character in the first 3 books was Ged's original mentor, the person who gave him his name, Ogion the Silent, and we learn a little bit about him as a young man and a feat that he was famous for of taming an earthquake, which, by the standards of Earthsea, is a very powerful achievement of magic. And it turns out to be, there's a lot more to the story there relating to Ogion's mentor and to this incomplete attribution, people's willingness to attribute causality to things that they simply don't know enough about or don't understand. And that becomes a major theme, which is, why is this here? why are these things as they are? Why don't women learn magic? Why don't people talk to dragons? Why do we do what we do? And these are unusual questions in a fantasy universe. They're not totally unknown, of course, but fantasy universes in general tend to look backwards and have a unusually degree of fixed values within which the characters sort of move. They are usually defending a status quo from a threatening outsider, and they don't delve into why the status quo is what it is. There will occasionally be tugs of, oh, so-and-so had a grievance and so on, and that's why they've joined the dark side, or, these people feel put on by the others. But in general, characters are in the position of defending the status quo, not investigating the status quo. So in The Other Wind, it begins with a new character who has come to see Ged, who is now in more or less retirement back on Gaunt, and Ged is a much happier person. It's a lovely portrait of growing old leading to sort of deeper fulfillment. Ged is living with Tanar. They are in love. He doesn't do magic anymore. He doesn't feel pulled. He's still the archmage, and you get the feeling that his word would still carry weight, but he doesn't worry about that sort of thing anymore. He is in where he considers the best place to be, which is that, fundamentally he's a mountain boy from Gaunt. This guy comes to him with troubles. He's having deeply disturbing dreams. He hasn't slept like a complete night in months. He's just wrecked. He had brought his problem to someone else and gotten a referral to Ged. And Ged, in a classic Earthsea indirect problem-solving method, he decides that the guy needs a cat. One of Ged's little pieces of wisdom as he gets older is that you should look for solutions to problems in sort of simple ways, that the world is so vast and interconnected that reaching out for massive amounts of power is simply likely to create, enormous problems and to tug at the supports of other things that you didn't want to damage. This is one of the general messages of The Farthest Shore, where there's a threat to sort of the underlying reality of Earthsea by an overreaching totalitarian type magician who wants to be immortal, and Ged is able to stop this by healing the rift that this man has made in the world. But most problems in life are not like that, and we don't always need to understand why something works to know that it works. In one of the earlier books, Ged had noticed um, the sort of the comfort and the healing that can come from a relationship with an animal. He was close to a fictional animal in the Earthsea universe called an otak, which brought him aid at a time when nothing else could. And he sort of remembers this, and he sends this guy to go get a kitten from an old lady, who and it works. And the guy gets a little better sleep, and as other signs and portents that something major is happening in Earthsea, they accumulate other characters from the earlier books, like Tenar and Aren, who is now king, and has been sort of like gradually, putting problems in Earthsea to right. I really like how Aren's attaining of the kingship is kind of like a side quest in Earthsea, and it's never gone into in detail, like how specifically he becomes king, how he sets about ruling wisely and justly, because what's understood is that what matters more is what formed Aren before he became king. And that continues in this book. We don't find out a ton, except that Aren is, a decent ruler who has, loyal, ethical servants and uses his power justly. But what we discover, and I don't want to, how should I put this? There's a massive sea change in the book related to the fundamental rules of the universe that reveal connections between the fate of humans, the fate of dragons, the natural world, the world of the dead, which everyone had sort of just put up with for thousands of years without realizing it. Like, this unhappy state of affairs had simply been allowed to continue because it had been forgotten that things had ever been different or could ever be different. And when people realized the shift underway and positioned themselves not to oppose it but to help it, even though it might be at the cost, of their whole lives, there's this deep sense of joy in the book. I don't even remember the final third of the book too clearly in terms of its words, because there was just this overwhelming sense of something wonderful is coming, and it's going to change everything. And the heartaches and the spiritual sicknesses of the past, the ones that we didn't even name because we thought it was simply part of being alive, are going to be washed away or made new. It's rapturous in both senses of the term. It's a rapturous moment in a fantasy universe, and it's not provoked by the need to conquer evil or some sort of external threat. It's not a deep discovery made by heroic action, although heroic action is sort of required to help it unfold correctly. It's just more like a deep shift in the nature of the world. Like Earthsea was saying to them all along, for thousands of years you've been living incompletely, wrongly. It's like you've been neglecting entire senses that you were born to have, and now they shall be restored if you just don't get in the way. And it's wonderful. It's just charming and hopeful. And taking that lesson for our own world, there are these deep shifts in the structures of our reality, social, biological, physical, that promise that things won't always be this way. There's been a lot of trend in pop culture, especially in science fiction, that sort of expresses a kind of cultural exhaustion with our moment, a sort of I guess it's just going to go on like this forever. And The Other Wind is a book that says it won't. There will be an end to a painful and exhausting status quo. There will be a new order and a new revelation. Le Guin, of course, was fairly well known as a exponent of alternative visions of social reality in some of her books, which maybe I'll talk about later. She explores anarchism to a great length. She explores a world with a different vision of gender. She explores pacifism, and I believe she's once quoted as saying, right now, capitalism seems to be everywhere, but a few hundred years ago, the divine right of kings was everywhere, and look where that is now. So I think her message of things will change whether we want them to or not, because the changes in The Other Wind and in the earlier novellas are not things that anyone looked for. There was no antagonist trying to push them into play. The protagonists become aware of them but didn't cause them, and so it was more just like these deep moments and shifts in the structure of the world, restoring things that had been lost. Now, it is a little what's the right way to put this? It makes me a little downcast that the positive future for Earthsea, represented in The Other Wind, was not the result of any direct heroic action. A little downcast. Not much, but a little, because there is still that element of, we have to make the future, and it won't just happen. Whereas the Gwyn in Other Wind and in some of their other books sort of has the future is being made. We can either, we have to decide what attitude we will take towards it, which is fundamentally a little more passive. And I don't think it's wrong, but it's not the kind of thing people sometimes look for from fiction. In fiction, we often want to take on, rhetorically speaking, a more active role in life than we're really able to in life, and that's part of how the whole fictional process works, as far as like building our ideals and shaping our sense of our place in the world, is that to some degree we need to believe that we have more ability to shape the future than we do. That's what kind of keeps us moving and gets us up. We have to sort of have a slightly, maybe even a grossly inflated sense of our part, because excuse me, because otherwise we tend to look out at the world with its 8 billion people and its infinite complexity that we only partially understand, if that, and we are too easily led into sort of a kind of passive attitude, which sometimes is absolutely the right thing to be, and it's a truth worth remembering. But I think for some people, the vision in The Other Wind might be a little too passive, as though deep wrongs and injustices, we have to wait for sort of a wave to rise and to sweep them away, and then just sort of surf the wave. Whereas they might want something more along the lines like, no, we have to make the wave. We cannot simply wait. But I'm deeply glad there are a lot of books about making the wave and making the change and doing the heroic activity, and so there's no shortage of those for people, and I'm very glad that there is this alternative vision for some people who have rightly grown a little skeptical of the utility of heroic action and are a little more willing to embrace the idea of simply sort of being ready for when big changes come, and knowing to recognize them when they're coming, and then not getting in their way, or helping midwife them into being in the world. It's a very fine book, and it's a lovely coda to the Earthsea universe. I think there is one or two other small short stories after this, but this is effectively the end, and it's a lovely thing for a whole fantasy universe to shift as the conclusion, rather than having characters shift in order to preserve a fictional world. It's nice to see the world itself change and grow and become something more beautiful and greater.